back, WNST. Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It says so out on the wrapper. Hope everybody's following along here as we get through the 4th of July weekend and into what we call summer training in the baseball world. This guy is one of my many, many baseball friends, and I've used the 4th and the holiday in and around this early part of July. I haven't done a sports segment since March, Eric Fisher. I went into the political realm and the COVID realm and how do we save Baltimore and what's going on locally and all of that. I didn't feel like talking to Ken Singleton about the Yes Network was appropriate, so I saved it to this week. I even saved John Sherholtz for this week. But all my favorite baseball people, I've sort of bunched together because this is usually like hot dogs and there's pennant races and there's trading deadlines and there's all-star game, who's good, who's bad, We've lived our lives this way, right? I mean, I had to think about this. I did some Freudian stuff with Sherholtz the other day. I started my fandom in 1973, and other than 94 and the debacle, this is... It feels a little like out of body, right, for anybody who's a baseball fan.
Well, it's almost sort of hard to know what day of the week it is or what week we're in, what month we're in, because your point is well taken that particularly baseball, but the other sports too, that they really sort of help mark the passage of time, and not having had all of those marking posts these last 4 months, it's been, we're all a little unmoored now, and maybe we're sort of getting back to that a little bit as these sports come back here, but they're all on sort of different timetables and different calendars than what they were. So, we're all still a little unmoored.
I think if you, as one of my wisdom people, I try to get the smartest guests on or the deeper thinkers. I know, you're a legal guy. You and I have talked for 20 years about the Angelos and the Orioles and all this stuff. Are you convinced that they can pull this off? Any of them? Like, outside of golf or... I even saw these tennis players running around trying to get themselves sick, and they're in an individual sport where they could stand to go out there and make money playing for no one other than cameras, right? I am really, really skeptical watching the lifestyle of these young people, and that's across the board for basketball, hockey, covering them, knowing how much they like sex, bars, food, people, fame, things, clubs, spending money, driving, or doing things. I am of the mindset that there's no way they're going to wind up keeping enough of these teams and people healthy to complete anything that we're going to call legitimate, 60 games or not.
It's really tough. I mean, we're all obviously facing something that we've never had to face in our lifetimes here, and really something that, unprecedented doesn't even seem like a strong enough word. But it creates bad choices, tough choices all the way around. And I sort of think about, I was on a conference call with Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, late last week, and basically the alternative, and they're doing sort of the bubble model in Florida, which of course is a big hotspot for COVID right now. And, they're trying to do everything they can to keep that bubble as tight and as legit as possible. But there are inherent risks. But the only other alternative, as he said, was to just completely give in to the virus and sort of throw your hands up. And that was sort of, in their minds, the worst of the two options, that either you try to press forward and do the very best you can, or you essentially just give up and deal with all of the sort of economic and societal ruin and all the sort of ramifications of not playing, forever almost, or for the foreseeable future. And it just, there's no great choices here. And it almost seems like where we're at now through all of these leagues is the best of a bad series of choices.
Eric Fisher, SBG now, the way to follow him. He is the U.S. editor for Sport Business Group. Known each other a long time, going back to the Washington Times era, and particularly troublesome for baseball in Baltimore, where I would think the Angelos family, one of the 8 to 10 to 12 that probably didn't want to play, massing money aside because they're getting the money whether they play or not, kind of, sort of. They don't have to share it with the baseball team. And we've talked about the Masson wars at length, ad nauseum, quite frankly, and who's going to get this money and when Peter's going to die and what's going to happen to all of this stuff. But we haven't factored in pandemic in year 29 of said lease. No one at the stadium, time's down, and now they're going to play. And, maybe they'll go 18-42 or something. Who knows, right? But it's going to look probably more like that than 42-18 and lightning in a bottle for the 2020 Orioles. And I don't know where the momentum is, but certainly this has not been good for momentum business for lots and lots of baseball franchises, and certainly not for minor league baseball in totality, and for teams like the Orioles that are waiting on the minor leagues to bear fruit. And, kind of like the education system in our country, no one's going to school, right?
Yeah, so with regard to the Orioles specifically, and we've talked about this before, the big thing that their whole mission was to twofold, to really sort of make some sort of statement, whether it's John or Lewis or whether it's somebody else, whoever it is, make some sort of statement that, sort of lay out your multi-year mission statement, much like the Ricketts did in Chicago, and even what the Astros did in Houston. And we can, Astros, with the trash cans and everything, that's a whole other story, but they still laid out a mission statement and then followed through upon it. And we need to sort of see a multi-year mission statement from the Orioles, whoever is sort of running that, and what that's going to be. And the other sort of piece of that is to identify who the next core is going to be. Find 5, 6, 7 guys who are really going to sort of form the foundation of whatever this next year of Orioles baseball is going to be. And that's really hard to do now without the requisite number of at-bats that these kids need, or these pitchers need, to just progress and advance. And that's both at the major league level and the minor league level. That at the major league level, there's only 60 games, and then you've got this 60-man player pool that the major league roster is going to draw from. There's only so many games and so many innings to go around for that group. And then for the minor leagues, with the whole 2020 season now officially canceled, all of those folks at those lower levels are also not going to get the reps to advance. So from that player development standpoint, there's some real impairment there, that they all sort of just lose that year. And then that process of finding that core, that foundation of guys to sort of form that next era, that process is all now delayed. So it's just it's a tough thing. But in the meantime, it would sure help a lot if there was some just codification and articulation of what that mission statement's going to be, and what the pathway is to bring this franchise back.
I always watch the baseball PR machine work on guys like you and my pal Maury Brown, and I know Barry Bloom was in and out and in again. He's got a new gig in the Sportico thing. So I'm calling all my buddies, and I know how Major League Baseball always likes to say, look, this number's up, and our bat app is up, and this is up, and they love baseball on the north side of Chicago, and it's a tradition, and we're going to save America with baseball the way we did with Sammy and Mark, and the way Cal saved the game. And I hear all of this, and yet I sit on 2 blocks from a major league franchise, literally, that used to be a storied franchise. And to your point, locally, there's crickets. I mean, like, literally, other than Lou and John with an anti-Trump tweet once and again, and the Star Spangled Banner thing that I got out of him last year at a travel event here in the city, at a Visit Baltimore event, they don't communicate with anyone. There is no sort of communication here. But the larger part of baseball's communication over the last 90 days was, phooey on you. No phooey on you. I spit on you. I'll throw a shoe at you. You're cheap. You lied. You're bad. That all went on in the same way it went on in the summer of 94, and it went on again 7 or 8 years later. And the history of you and me being much younger people collecting baseball cards of Andy Messersmith and Kurt Flood, and all of that sort of coming back. And by the way, I'm tipping my cap right now for the Negro players and Joe Posnanski and everybody out in Kansas City. I've been doing that all week too, but boy, baseball ran itself through the mud again unnecessarily in May and most of June, right? And now they're going to come out with this half-ass season. But some of the push-throughs, right? The designated hitter in the National League, the 3 batters for the pitchers, the guy on second base, all of these sort of test tube things that they've been wanting to make the games 2 hours and 28 minutes again. I guess they're going to try to push all that through, and maybe 5 years from now the Orioles are glorious, and Adley Rutschman's going to the Hall of Fame, and they have a 30-year lease, and they own half the parking lot, and they put up condo. I don't know, but I don't have any crystal ball for any of that here locally that feels like what I just said, talking to John Churls about moving the team to the suburbs and how awesome it's worked out. I don't see that happening for the Baltimore Orioles, and I'm trying to figure out where the rainbow and the silver lining on the other end of COVID could be for my town and my franchise. But even greater than that is the sport itself 3 weeks ago looked like they weren't going to play and eat their own, so to speak, that they were that close to doing that. Phooey on them is what I say, Eric.
So there's a lot there, and this last couple of months have been really brutal as we've seen the labor negotiations sort of play out, and I've been writing a lot about this, and I think what this whole pandemic has done is sort of bring forward a lot of underlying trends that were already sort of happening and just kicked it all into overdrive. And what we've seen, and just that's across the entire sports industry, and what we've sort of seen around the legalization of gambling in a lot of states, and what we've seen in terms of various ticketing trends and operational trends inside of venues, and a lot of things that people have been sort of talking about or just sort of being brought forward in accelerated fashion. And what has now happened within baseball is a lot of underlying tension between players and owners have also been brought forward. And what we sort of saw these last couple of months was sort of a preview of the broader CBA negotiations that have to happen next year as the current deal expires after the 2021 season. And all of the things that were the existing concerns in and around service time manipulation and how the free agent market operates and sort of what constitutes baseball industry revenue and what doesn't, and all those things that were kind of there are now really there and very, very present, and it just kind of colors everything. And what has happened as a result of that is a lot of the sort of care and feeding of the game and all of the things that need to be done to get casual fans engaged. They've really kind of taken their eye off the ball on that, and you're sort of left, as you suggest, with a game that just has a lot of some deep existential challenges. And you look at sort of the upswing and all the other major sports that, despite all the challenges of COVID, football's got wind at its back. Basketball remains a growth industry. I think hockey has got some wind at its back, and they're about to do a very nice new media rights deal. And you sort of see where baseball is in comparison, and I see real challenges there.
Well, and from a PR standpoint, they haven't really gotten in front of it, right? And nor has the MLBPA on how to act and how to. And Lord knows what happened with the Tony Clark Manfred, midnight meeting in the desert, and all the background of all of that. But the fact that it ever got to that point for baseball and where the future is, it really is sort of a dark cloud as I sit here in Baltimore. And I'm not looking at you to paint it bright, because I don't know that there is, but I think it's their job to paint it bright, right? And to me, the fact that nobody's coming out with a flashlight and saying, hey, the light's on here. We care about Baltimore. We care about you. We care about fans. We care about the business. We care about athlete rights. I don't hear anything. And it's just, they're so poor at running the franchise here. But then I think, the fish sort of rots from the head. I mean, what have we figured out what Rob Manfred's good at yet, Eric? I mean, literally, what will he be lauded for? What is his strength at this point?
So the thing, he's coming up here on the 6th anniversary of his election in your town, and coming up next month. And the thing that I would really sort of point to that I do think offers some hope for the sport is I think they've done a very nice job on the youth participation piece. They've done a lot of work with Little League Baseball and other organizations in the youth participation space, both baseball and football. And we have 4 straight years of meaningful growth in kids actually playing baseball and softball. And they've been aided in fairness in some issues with kids playing football and some other issues, but they've gotten after it, and they've had much more coordination again between MLB and Little League, and it's really begun to pay off. And there's been some good work done on field restoration and promoting other forms of play besides just 9-on-9, fully organized travel ball kinds of things, and doing things that are a little bit smaller and more accessible. And I do think that's been some good work that has really been done there. But that still is a whole other conversation from the fact that we all sort of point to, and remains the case, that way too many people in this country don't know who Mike Trout is, and for example, and a lot of those other sort of big time talents, compared to their peers in other sports, just remain far too unknown to the sort of casual consumer.
Yeah, LeBron doesn't have that problem in L.A., right?
LeBron does not have that problem. And now, in fairness, LeBron's got rings and Mike Trout doesn't. But still, there's some real issues there. But to answer your original question, I do think right now, 6 years in post-election, I would point to the youth piece as, Manfred's key achievement at this point.
Well, Eric Fisher is here. He is Eric Fisher, SBG. He is the U.S. editor for Sport Business Group. We usually talk a lot of baseball and Masson, and we get together over all of that. And I guess during the pandemic, the question is if and when. And I guess for people who lived through Kennedy and, we lived through 9/11 and baseball or football, they're going to play on Thanksgiving weekend and all this stuff, leading the way for our culture, and that we look to that as if we're playing football, all things are well. One other piece of this is like whether people are really going to want to watch baseball in an empty stadium, and how weird it's been to watch soccer in empty stadiums, and what that's looked like in Europe as they've sort of unrolled that a little bit for people on this side of the pond watching matches over the weekend as well. I do question NFL football in an empty stadium and the general weirdness of that from an optics and from an auditory standpoint as to whether people are going to find that all that compelling.
Yeah, now what we've seen so far, though, is we're all still just so starved for any sort of original sports content that basically anything new and fresh is shown big ratings increases. So we're looking at the initial golf tournaments, the initial NASCAR races, the drafts that baseball and football have done, the Last Dance, all of these things that represent any sort of fresh sports content, the numbers have gone way up. Now, once we get into a more, in a month or so here where we have, essentially all of these major sports in sort of a regular competitive rhythm, how are things going to look, and maybe we come to some different conclusions. But so far, the numbers have all been pointing pretty much straight up, and there's been a lot of experimentation going on in terms of pumped-in crowd noise and fan cutouts and tarping of seats. And, there's a lot of different things that are going to sort of happen operationally to sort of make it feel a little less ghost towny, for lack of a better phrase. And that experimentation is going to continue until we get to something resembling a full attendance situation again. But, right now, again, the whole world really is still so starved for sports content that, we're all sort of watching without fans in the stands and, putting up with it, essentially.
One of the things for baseball that I drove to Nags Head last week, Eric. So I drove down 301, which you lived in D.C. forever. I drove down past Bowie, and then I drove past Norfolk, and then I drove home up through the tunnel bridge on the Eastern Shore past Salisbury, literally, right? So I went past 3 Oriole minor league towns that, I don't know what's going to become of AAA and AA and single A, and who's going to get contracted, and, what's really going to happen to the Sally when it's all done, and the Eastern League or whatever. But minor league baseball, it's never going to be the same at the end of this pandemic. And I go back to the big picture of Major League Baseball and saying, I don't know if it's good or bad that they have teams in Salisbury or Bowie. I'm old enough to remember when they didn't, right? And life went on and all of that. But I can't think that it's good, and I can't think that it's good for the industry to be taking jobs away and all that in the big picture. And the fact that little towns like Frederick don't stop 50 times a summer, or Aberdeen, or those kinds of places to play baseball and gather families and children in farm towns to watch baseball, to want to be a baseball player. I think this is just It's almost tragic as I drove through these towns, as much as I love baseball and considering my last name and what I do for a living. But if there ain't no money there to be made, and that's where they are, and they want to give Mike Trout $40 million a year and not have the Fresno Bees play, well, then I guess that's the way it's going to go down, right?
This whole situation around minor league baseball is just one of the more sad things that I've had to cover over the last year plus here, that before even this whole pandemic started, Major League Baseball was in the midst of trying to reorganize the whole situation and take away, a quarter of the franchises and really rescale and remodel the whole thing. And now that the pandemic has hit, I was just on a lengthy conference call with Pat O'Connor, the president of minor league baseball, and he literally used the words dire straits, that this is a business that, pretty much makes 85 to 90 cents on the dollar strictly through gate attendance, which obviously can't happen given the current situation, which led them to have to bang the entire season this year. And, what's going to be left on the other side of this, both by circumstance and by design, is a much smaller and reduced situation for minor league baseball. And, what Pat was saying was that because of what's going on, they could be looking at literally half of the North American franchises having to sell or go insolvent because of what's happening here. And the real tragedy in this whole thing, dealing across all of these sports now, in this role that I have, and dealing with all of these leagues. And, to a man, they all say that they want to get younger, want to attract more families, and want to get more grassroots. Well, there's nobody who does better with families and grassroots than minor league baseball. And the pandemic is a pandemic, and, there's only so much that we can do to deal with that. But the design part of this, and the real tragedy of this is that so much of what's been happening intentionally to reduce the size of minor league baseball is all done through the optics or through the prism of baseball operations, and not looking at this through the effective marketing vehicle that it is. That for me, growing up in upstate New York and watching the old Oneonta Yankees and seeing, a bunch of big-time talent come through there, and we all have our minor league stories. This was our introduction, really, as kids to the sport for so many people, and to willingly walk away from that in any fashion and not fight tooth and nail to make that as big and as thriving as possible. I don't understand that. And now you layer the pandemic on top of it, and it's really one of the great tragedies. And you sort of think about not just the teams and the players, but all of these folks who start working in the industry that I cover, that this is their first job out of college, starting to work in the industry, and these little mom and pop businesses that sort of make their livelihood off of minor league baseballs, and charities that sort of gain money and awareness through being able to sort of advance their mission in and around minor league baseball, and the list goes on. And it's something that really makes me sad, because, these big leagues, they've got these big media contracts that sort of will help them get to the other side. Minor league baseball doesn't have that. The whole thing is strictly on gate attendance, and to not have that and lose a whole year like this, it's just a tough thing.
He is Eric Fisher, SBG. Tell everybody what Sport Business Group is, and I know it well from the other side of the pond, but you're the guy over here at sportbusiness.com keeping things straight in the United States of America.
Yep, and it's a very different situation that we're not writing about just media contracts and sponsorship deals and the usual stuff. The whole cadence of our news coverage has been very different now, where these last 4 months it's been about sort of winding down and what teams are leagues were doing, and now everybody's trying to wind back up and get to some sort of notion of the other side in these kind of various resumption scenarios. But in a weird sort of way, these last 4 months, never been busier, because everybody's dealing with these unprecedented circumstances. So we're continuing to try to rock and roll here and build and grow and do so through this sort of global prism, because my colleagues in Europe and Asia, they're dealing with very much the same sort of thing. And the frustrating thing about this is as I sort of talk to my colleagues, they're farther along than we are now, and because they're farther along getting to the other side of the pandemic and flattening their curves, that we're dealing with situations in both Europe and Asia where they're talking about bringing meaningful numbers of fans back in the building now. And, I long for the days when we can have similar conversations, about that here in North America.
Leadership matters. So do masks. I was down in North Carolina last week and saw that they were. So, well, I know you're up in the in the boroughs and somewhere in New York, and I know you guys got it first. Stay safe, and someday we'll get together and have overpriced milkshakes at Nats Park again, okay? And they'll be delicious. We'll love them, I promise you. The only silver lining here is that the Nationals have not gotten to run around and fly their flag in Baltimore, so at least we got that going on. But I'm sure there's a home and home coming soon.
Yeah, and in fact, the way the schedule is going to lay out, it's all based on regional play, that each team is going to play only the teams in their own division and then the interleague in the same geographic area. So expect a lot of Yankees and Nationals in the Orioles' future.
Well, right, and the Phillies probably, too. It's gonna remind me a little bit of the Skipjacks and the Hershey Bears, I think, Eric. Hey, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on, as always.
No problem.
Eric Fisher, SBG, the way to follow him at Sport Business Group. He has been my friend a long time, covering the inside of baseball and the Masson crap and Angelos and the birth of the Washington Nationals and the Montreal Expos. And what happens to Youppi in all of this? I don't know. I mean, Youppi doesn't have to wear a mask probably in Montreal. Nasty at WNST.net. Keep it calm, staying local. Find us out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat. And happy 4th. Wash your hands, wear a mask, stay safe, everybody. Stay Baltimore positive.